knowledge of the fact that such a thing might be concocted, had once stumbled upon it by accident, and so he couldn't see why a fellow who knew all about powder except how to make it couldn't do as well. He worked mighty hard mixing all sorts of things together, until finally he evolved a substance that looked like powder. He had been very proud of the stuff, and had gone about the village of the Sarians exhibiting it to everyone who would listen to him, and explaining what its purpose was and what terrific havoc it would work, until finally the natives became so terrified at the stuff that they wouldn't come within a rod of Perry and his invention. Finally I suggested that we experiment with it and see what it would do. So Perry built a fire after placing the powder at a safe distance, and then touched a glowing ember to a minute particle of the deadly explosive. It extinguished the ember. Repeated experiments with it determined me that in searching for a high explosive, Perry had stumbled upon a fire extinguisher that would have made his fortune for him back in our own world. So now he set himself to work to build a scientific canoe. I had suggested that we construct a dugout, but Perry convinced me that we must build something more in keeping with our positions of supermen in this world of the Stone Age. "We must impress these natives with our superiority," he explained. "You must not forget, David, that you are Emperor of Pellucidar. As such, you may not with dignity approach the shores of a foreign power in so crude a vessel as a dugout." I pointed out to Perry that it wasn't much more incongruous for the Emperor to cruise in a canoe than it was for the Prime Minister to attempt to build one with his own hands. He had to smile at that, but in extenuation of his act he assured me that it was quite customary for prime ministers to give their personal attention to the building of imperial navies, and this, he said, is the imperial navy of His Serene Highness David I, Emperor of the Federated Kingdoms of Pellucidar. I grinned, but Perry was quite serious about it. It had always seemed rather more or less of a joke to me that I should be addressed as Majesty and all the rest of it. Yet my imperial power and dignity had been a very real thing during my brief reign. 20 tribes had joined the federation, and their chiefs had sworn eternal fealty to one another and to me. Among them were many powerful though savage nations. Their chiefs we had made kings, their tribal lands kingdoms. We had armed them with bows and arrows and swords, in addition to their own more primitive weapons. I had trained them in military discipline and in so much of the art of war as I had gleaned from extensive reading of the campaigns of Napoleon, von Moltke, Grant, and the ancients. We had marked out as best we could natural boundaries dividing the various kingdoms. We had warned tribes beyond these boundaries that they must not trespass, and we had marched against and severely punished those who had. We had met and defeated the Mahars and the Sagoths. In short, we had demonstrated our right to empire, and very rapidly were we being recognized and heralded abroad when my departure for the outer world and Hooge's treachery had set us back. But now I had returned. The work that fate had undone must be done again, and though I must needs smile at my imperial honors, I none the less felt the weight of duty and obligation that rested upon my shoulders. Slowly the imperial navy progressed toward completion. She was a wondrous craft, but I had my doubts about her. When I voiced them to Perry, he reminded me gently that my people for many generations had been mine owners, not shipbuilders, and consequently I couldn't be expected to know much about the matter. I was minded to inquire into his hereditary fitness to design battleships, but inasmuch as I already knew that his father had been a minister in a backwoods village far from the coast, I hesitated lest I offend the dear old fellow. He was immensely serious about his work, and I must admit that in so far as appearances went, he did extremely well with the meager tools and assistants at his command. We had only 2 short axes and our hunting knives, yet with these we hewed trees, split them into planks, surfaced and fitted them. The navy was some 40 feet in length by 10 feet beam. Her sides were quite straight and fully 10 feet high, for the purpose, explained Parry, of adding dignity to her appearance and rendering it less easy for an enemy to board her. As a matter of fact, I knew that he had had in mind the safety of her crew under javelin fire. The lofty sides made an admirable shelter. Inside, she reminded me of nothing so much as a floating trench. There was also some slight analogy to a huge coffin. Her prow sloped sharply backward from the water line, quite like a line of battleship. Parry had designed her more for moral effect upon an enemy, I think, than for any real harm she might inflict, and so those parts which were to show were the most imposing. Below the water line she was practically non-existent. She should have had considerable draft, but as the enemy couldn't have seen it, Parry decided to do away with it, and so made her flat bottom. It was this that caused my doubts about her. There was another little idiosyncrasy of design that escaped us both until she was about ready to launch. There was no method of propulsion. Her sides were far too high to permit the use of sweeps, and when Parry suggested that we pole her, I remonstrated on the grounds that it would be a most undignified and awkward manner of sweeping down upon the foe, even if we could find or wield poles that would reach to the bottom of the ocean. Finally, I suggested that we convert her into a sailing vessel. When once the idea took hold, Parry was most enthusiastic about it, and nothing would do but a four-masted, full-rigged ship. Again I tried to dissuade him, but he was simply crazy over the psychological effect which the appearance of this strange and mighty craft would have upon the natives of Pellucidar, so we rigged her with thin hides for sails and dried gut for rope. Neither of us knew much about sailing a full-rigged ship, but that didn't worry me a great deal, for I was confident that we should never be called upon to do so, and as the day of launching approached, I was positive of it. We had built her upon a low bank of the river, close to where it emptied into the sea, and just above high tide. Her keel we had laid upon several rollers cut from small trees. The ends of the rollers in turn rested upon parallel tracks of long saplings. Her stern was toward the water. A few hours before we were ready to launch her, she made quite an imposing picture, for Parry had insisted upon setting every shred of canvas. I told him that I didn't know much about it, but I was sure that at launching the hull only should have been completed, everything else being completed after she had floated safely. At the last minute there was some delay while we sought a name for her. I wanted her christened the Parry in honor both of her designer and that other great naval genius of another world, Captain Oliver Hazard Perry of the United States Navy. But Parry was too modest. He wouldn't hear of it. We finally decided to establish a system in the naming of the fleet. Battleships of the first class should bear the names of kingdoms of the Federation, armored cruisers the names of kings, cruisers the names of cities, and so on down the line. Therefore we decided to name the first battleship Sorry, after the first of the federated kingdoms. The launching of the Sorry proved easier than I contemplated. Parry wanted me to get in and break something over the bow as she floated out upon the bosom of the river, but I told him that I should feel safer on dry land until I saw which side up the Sorry would float. I could see by the expression of the old man's face that my words had hurt him, but I noticed that he didn't offer to get in himself, and so I felt less contrition than I might otherwise. When we cut the ropes and removed the blocks that held the Sorry in place, she started for the water with a lunge. Before she hit it, she was going at a reckless speed, for we had laid our tracks quite down to the water, greased them, and at intervals placed rollers all ready to receive the ship as she moved forward with stately dignity. But there was no dignity in the Sorry. When she touched the surface of the river, she must have been going 20 or 30 miles an hour. Her momentum carried her well out into the stream, until she came to a sudden halt at the end of the long line, which we had had the foresight to attach to her bow and fasten to a large tree upon the bank.